I just kind of feel like a lot of like pretty much every movie that's out right now, like a mainstream movie that's out right now, like if we think about like Joker 2, Terrifier 3, which I haven't seen, Megalopolis, um, I feel like there's a common thread of like the depravity of culture, like in the movies right now in the specific month
Yeah.
of October 2024. Um, you know what I mean? Like, I feel like the movies
Yeah.
themselves are kind of about even the substance to some degree. It's kind of or like kind of like the vibes are like culture is corrupting, and so like let's make movies about that. And then predictably, like half of the culture is like this sucks. You know what I mean? Because this is like because it's making fun of culture. It's making fun of or I don't know. It's like it's in some way besmirching the viewer or and the art itself. It's being like, oh, this is like beyond. You know, this is like to some degree self-referential and dismissing. It's like participating ironically. You know.
I think you're totally right, and I think it's like a really interesting um part of the movies this year of like they all feel like ironic. Like if you remember, there was this whole conspiracy theory that Joker 2 was like purposefully bad
Right.
and that it was like supposed to be bad to
Yeah.
like make people think about something.
Right. The
And I feel
director
like
retreated to a ranch to avoid the
yeah,
harsh critiques that would come from
yeah,
the
yeah, and I
opening
just like
weekend.
yeah, and it's interesting that like even the movies that are working, like Terrifier 3 and I think The Substance are both movies that are like kind of purposefully not very artsy or like are purposely kind of shoddy in their construction. I don't know. I if I was a theorist, I would maybe say there's some kind of like, we're so past this point of culture that now everyone's just kind of like you have to kind of make it ironic in some way. I don't know.
Well, because Megalopolis is all polish, right? It's like all like high. It's all like big, huge name actors, and like,
Yeah.
would you say that's true,
I mean,
or is there like a
basically,
purposeful? Um,
I think Megalopolis is really interesting because I think it's like the biggest failure uh, on a profound level that I've like ever seen. Of like, it's $120 million movie where one man got to control the entire production, and like, I don't think it like there's some really beautiful like cinematography in it and stuff, but just like fundamentally, it is like deranged. It's like a deranged movie. And I think that's very interesting, and I don't know what it means. I don't really have like a takeaway from it other than like it's like the most bizarrely written movie, and I don't know if we'll ever see anything like it because he paid his own money to make it. Francis Ford Coppola literally just got to like no one could say no. And I think it's like it's it's fascinating. Like almost every scene, something bizarre happens that like in a normal movie would have gotten like written out or someone would have said no to it. Um, like it's it's wild. It's really wild. It is. I mean, it's kind of what you're saying. It's like it's this putting the polish on someone's like fever dream, where it's like everyone has these ideas of what a big movie they would make if they're given $100 million, and it's like Francis Ford Coppola got to do that,
mhm.
and it doesn't work like at all.
Do you think there's some level of like it being either self-awarely or not, like representative of like the fall of Rome, like the beginning of the end of like the empire, like the auteur having full autonomy and that decadence being its own downfall?
I really could not tell you. I really don't know because on one level, I'm like the idea that this movie is so ridiculous. I'm like, any human being, let alone an artist at the level of Francis Ford Coppola, should be able to watch this movie and be like, this doesn't work. So I'm like, almost it has to be purposeful because I'm like Francis Ford Coppola made like Apocalypse Now, like one of the greatest movies ever made. He made The Godfather, which is like everyone's dad's favorite movie. Like clearly, this is a man who knows how to make a movie, and the fact that like some of this stuff the line that I keep thinking about is like there's like this weird line where Giancarlo Esposito says, "I love trees as much as the next man, but this is ridiculous." And I'm like, what does that mean? like literally, what does that mean? Like I'm like, how could you write that line and it not be a joke? But the movie takes itself so seriously. Like it really is trying to say like Rome/America is falling, and if we like come together and invent a new future, we will save it. But like, you know, the joke I made after watching it is like the future that the movie presents is literally Hudson Yards. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like it's literally like this idea that like some weird creativity will from like a genius man is going to save the world. It's a fascinating movie. It's crazy. Everyone should see it. I'm going as Caesar Catalina for Halloween.
Well, an attempted cold open has transpired.
Yeah.
So now I will say, Mutant Manifesto episode 18. Welcome back, Lucas Murphy, the first returning guest, pretty much, I think,
Whoa.
of a Mutant
That's
Manifesto.
amazing. Hell yeah. Hell yeah.
How have you? I don't know. How have you mutated since we reviewed Chud? Uh, in like what, like 9 episodes ago.
How have I mutated? That's such a good question. I mean, my whole life I feel like has mutated since I was on the podcast last, you know? I'm changing my chemical makeups. I'm experimenting with sobriety. I'm experimenting with the different, you know, sort of I don't know. I think that is very mutant coded of like I think this year as particularly since this podcast last, I think I've gone through some life changes and been like, "Whoa, I can actually change my life and the my emotional makeup." Um and it's been a very interesting process, much like the Substance, much like Lizzie Sparkles. You know, it's kind of like, can we really create a better version of ourselves? Are we inevitably going to become who we are? And what does that look like? I think.
Indeed, this podcast is certainly. I think part of mutation is breaking out of some sort of cycle.
Mm-hmm.
And the question always is like, you know, to what end and like to what extent are we running away from ourselves or whatever. But yeah. Also, we've got the same makeup as we did with the Chud episode. It's me, Josh, and Lucas. Josh, how are you doing?
I'm doing all right. Nice to see you again, Lucas. It's
Yeah, great to see you too.
Well, not to
How have you
belabor.
been since I last saw you, Josh?
I've been all right. You know, telling Jackie my job feels increasingly fake, but you know, hanging in there. I think that fall weather
What?
really suits me. So yeah.
Well, I wouldn't know in LA, but uh,
Sorry about that.
what job isn't fake, really?
Yeah, I think that's kind of my dilemma when it comes to like the job search too, right? Like I keep looking at these job descriptions and I'm like, this is what you tell me I'm going to be doing, and I know it's going to be not this or some sort of
Yeah.
falsified rendition of this, and yeah, I don't know. It really does make me question like what a career path I should take should be.
Well, so just to, you know, not to belabor the theme, like, or whatever, like, but, you know, this episode we're talking about The Substance, the movie that came out this past month, which is a movie by a fucking French person talking about
Mm.
America.
Talk about mutants, am I right?
Exactly, putting her baguette nose into the American dream and trying to make a point about it. But yeah, Coralie Fargeaut. It's her sophomore film, and it's like been doing really well, got really well received. Starring Elizabeth Sparkle, aka Demi Moore, as a like a someone who just turned 50 and is like a beautiful Hollywood starlet. Film opens showing her star and the Walk of Fame, the Hollywood Walk of Fame. It shows it being inaugurated, and then it shows it over the 30 years or so since it was originally inaugurated. Shows it being cracked, and ice cream being spilled on it, and it being swept up and denigrated by time. And then this movie also stars, of course, Dennis Quaid as Harvey, the flamboyant and lecherous producer, and it also stars Margaret Qualley as Sue, the younger version of Elizabeth Sparkle.
Well, that's a description I want to discuss. Is she really the younger version?
Right,
Is she a mutant? That's where the movie really, the movie kind of falls apart, but also is interested in that, the explanation of really what's going on.
Totally. I think I kind of am interested in putting this might be kind of an editing nightmare for me, but I don't really care. I forgot to say that I forgot to introduce Lucas Foley as a filmmaker and writer, LA-based filmmaker and writer. So that's one thing that I could have put some other place. But another thing that I could have put some other place is us discussing what we're really interested in when we are going into this topic. But hey, it might be kind of interesting to peek behind the curtains of right now, what are you specifically interested in with talking about this text, Lucas and Josh?
Okay, you're putting me on. I'd taken a lot of notes, and I don't know if any of this will land on you all, but I think the very first, I wouldn't say half, in I guess Liz Sparkle's version, I some quick notes where the Barbie movie came to mind, Botox, sort of the physical appearance and shifting one's appearance and trying to make that or extend one's longevity or the longevity of one's youth. I was thinking about all of the sort of, I guess, vertical lines that there was transitions, but literally linear paths to represent these transitions. I wasn't really sure where I wanted to go with that in particular, but it almost suggested that there was one route, but then these are all parallel routes alongside of it. I keep thinking of that, the two yellow lines, right? And this, I guess, happens in the Liz to Sue transformation. And then after, I guess, post Sue, post Sue's birth, I guess, it felt like I was watching 90 minutes of a Coke commercial or some type of, and that being particularly jarring. I find any sort of satire about commercials particularly funny and good, but this one felt painful to me.
Totally. I mean, for me, I think that it's this thing that this idea that you are one. This concept that you are one, I think, is kind of disproven by this movie, meaning that from time to time, from body to body, you really do change over time. There is no essential you. That's something I'm interested in, and how does that get? How does the self get then divided into different battle lines? Depending on your coding, and then I think that Harvey has this quote that's people always want something new, but then the irony is that this is a retro kind of vibe to this movie, and that kind of goes into the this concept. This is super almost enlarged irony of the male gaze and of hotness. This a parody of hotness, this parody of the male gaze, the lingering shots that take so long,
Yeah.
That is like funny and uncomfortable at the same time. That's kind of also like, it's kind of cringe and also kind of hot and also kind of like disturbing. And I feel like that is this idea of like people want something new, but what is the new? Like, is it really new? Do people really want it, etc.? And then I guess so that kind of goes into the like potentially the idea of like hotness itself being a horrible thing in a way. That's kind of something I have to kind of meditate on here. Like hotness as a mold being something that is terrible because of its unachievableness or whatever, and also because of it has a lot of sinister aspects to it, both as the possessor of it and as the subject to it.
I think one overall thing that struck me the entire time of the movie. I saw it about 3 weeks ago, so I have a little bit of like. It'll be interesting to be like, how do I react having seen it a while back? But the thing I think that has stuck with me is like the tone and the like kind of, Josh, what you were saying about this, like the commercial aspects of the movie itself. And like, I don't really have an answer, but I'm really curious, like, do you guys think it works, the tone? And like, what is the purpose of using that tone in this kind of movie? Because I think, um, like, there's a version of this movie that could have been very like Cronenbergian dark, and that's not this movie at all. It's like very much like doesn't take itself that seriously, like kind of through the whole movie. And I'm curious, like, is there an artistic, sort of statement being made by making all of it, this kind of like saccharine, colorful, absurdist thing? And what does that have to say? In some ways, I feel like I watched this movie and I was like, there's a deeper layer here that I don't think is on the surface of like, really, what is the substance? What is happening here? Because on one level, the movie is incredibly simple. Like, I think in my letterboxd review of this, I said, like, from the log line, you could kind of guess exactly what happens in the movie. Like, there's very few like surprises on the surface level of the movie. It's kind of goes down the formula that we think it would. But within that, there's a lot of these questions that like don't get answered. I think why does the substance exist? What does it actually do to you? Like, what is the relationship between the younger self and the older self, or the the third self, I guess, that we get later on. So I don't know. I think is what's really interesting to me, is like dissecting what are the kind of choices that are made and what do they have to say about kind of the subject matter.
Totally. So maybe we'll just like let's just I think this is it's a good one because it kind of allows us to kind of like summarize the entire plot and then just kind of dig into the different details. Whereas in other movies you'd have to kind of like go through the plot beat by beat. But in this one, it really is actress turns 50 and she's a what do you call it? Like Pilates, or what is the like jazzercise?
Yeah.
She's like a workout.
Yeah.
She's like a workout like an 80s like workout leader. What do you call that? The type of person that's like, okay, great, like, and then she'll be like, and remember, take care of yourself at the end of each episode. And she's known as Elizabeth Sparkle, this like the star of this genre of TV that exists in this universe where like scantily clad women are kind of like promoting fitness allegedly to other women and or whoever, but they're like super hot at the same time. And so she just is turning 50 at the beginning of this. She goes to a doctor appointment. A hot young stud slips her a little like marketing slip that like advertises the substance. She plays the tape or whatever at her apartment and sees that it's like advertising this like rejuvenation drug that's like in experimental phases, but it like makes a new you. She takes the bargain, right? She takes the devil's bargain or whatever. The deal is that every 7 days, she switches by birthing through her spine a newer version of herself, a youthful, sexier, hotter by conventional standards version of herself is birthed from her spine. And the deal of this thing is that like every 7 days your consciousness switches between the two. And if you don't do that, then complications may emerge. But so she takes the bargain. She like births this younger version of herself. The younger version of herself has a lot of fun, gets the job that her older self had as like the new workout leader, and like hooks up with people and stuff. But then of course every 7 days she has to switch back and forth. Before you know it, the older version of herself gets super depressed and sad and starts to loathe herself and kind of like envy her younger self. And the bifurcation between these two different modes of being become more exacerbated, and little bits of the older self begin to age rapidly when the younger self doesn't switch quickly enough. And as it goes on, the older version of herself gets more and more depraved and ugly and crone-like and hag-like. And the younger version of herself tries to kind of maintain as much dominance as possible into the life. Eventually, the younger self tries to inject again the same substance into herself that the older self injected to create the younger self. And instead of making an even younger and even hotter version of the young self, which probably would have been like a 15-year-old, which is kind of an interesting thing to think about. Would have like appeared as a 15-year-old. Yeah. Like if you're like a 50 and you're saying that the hotter version of yourself is a 25-year-old that's super hot, what's this? If you continue that formula, like okay, well it's kind of weird. But instead of getting that, we get like a hideous mutant that is like barely human looking, and that mutant goes on to try to present as the young version of the star at an award ceremony, and it's a whole thing, and blood is everywhere, and it's a whole humiliating thing for everyone involved. And that's kind of the outline of the movie, honestly.
I think there were two distinct movies that I watched. There was like the Sparkle side, and then the like Sue or Sparkle and Sue, and then there was this like Carrie sort of like goblin monster movie that happened at the end. Mm-hmm. And so that's all I wanted to bring out as like felt like, and it was a very long film. It was like 2.5 hours, right? Mm-hmm. So it's like it really felt like two movies.
Yeah. Totally. And I feel like, to me, it's sort of like the core of the first movie was the battle for control between Lizzie and Sue, you know? And then the second that Sue wins and takes control, it kind of becomes something else, you know?
So let's get into let's start by like tracing the tone through these like two different movies, right? So I would say that there's kind of three different modes of tone, I would say. The first is when we see Elizabeth Sparkle as a 50-year-old, and she is like lonely, and she's like feeling unfulfilled by her like incredible success as a Hollywood star. And she's feeling very lonely, and there's actually, it's kind of desaturated a little bit, like color wise, I think. And there's like there's like scenes of like, I want to say like garbage kind of flying in the wind, and then there's like scenes of her just like sitting by herself, like drinking wine and stuff in her like lush apartment, which has like a huge like poster of her up on it. And she's just kind of like she's a scene with it's just kind of like a sad, kind of depressing portrait of like an old star, and then like for the majority of the movie, the main part, which is like her versus the younger, newly birthed version of herself. How would you describe that tone, Lucas?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is what's interesting to me is like there's like a layer of unreality through the whole movie that I don't know. I think my instinct was I wanted there to be a more distinct shift in tone of like is Lizzie Sparkle's life ever real? Does it ever feel real to us in the beginning? Because in some ways it
Mm-hmm.
is. In some ways there's a reality. There's like a concreteness to like she goes to the doctor. Like she has to walk through streets. That's another thing I
Mm,
wanted. Actually, I forgot about this. Focusing on transportation versus dream logic in this movie
mm.
because in the first half of the movie they actually travel a lot of places and we see them outside by the end of the movie, like the mutant just kind of jumps from her apartment to the
Right,
studio and
right.
back and forth. Like there's this really interesting, and I guess I want to give them credit of like I think they're doing this purposefully, but it also could just be kind of you know uh, who knows if it's just like editing whatever. But
Mm-hmm.
so basically, all to say, I think when I think about the first half of the movie, it's like or the first third, I guess. There's a really interesting thing of like in some ways it feels very real and in some ways like the fitness show that she's on it's
Mm-hmm.
like it's so ridiculous and
Yeah.
then the second half of the like but I do feel Demi Moore. I do feel Lizzie Sparkle as a real person and I think she gives the best performance in the movie and I think she
Mm-hmm.
has this like this very real sadness of like
Mm-hmm.
being
Mm-hmm.
in LA. It's like you meet these people.
Mm-hmm.
Like I met this. I mean, it's not an actress. It's not about beauty, but like I met this director who stopped directing 20 years ago and lives a wonderful, rich life. But there's like this sadness of like the thing I thought I would do for my life, I can't do anymore. And I think that's such a real experience here. Um, Yeah, and I think a more traditional movie, I guess, would have made the first 30 minutes feel incredibly real and then had it get more and more surreal as the substance gets used. But this movie doesn't really do that. It's kind of from the beginning in this really weird tone between do we take it seriously or not, I think, for me.
That's definitely it's another theme I wanted to really focus on in this movie is like this like unreality, like very clearly simulacra-ism of it all. Because it actually kind of reminds me of the way that Cyberpunk 2077 represents Los Angeles, which is in their version Night City, but like it's the same, it's based on Los Angeles. And Cyberpunk originally was like 2020, I think. Cyberpunk 2020, which came out in the 80s, which and was by like an American who wrote this like RPG system. But Cyberpunk 2077, the video game, is like a Polish imagination of LA based on this figurine of it from the 80s that was projecting into the future. So it is like kind of like simulacra on simulacra on simulacra. Like it's like a Polish like projection of what this like black creator of this like Los Angeles RPG system of the future to him when he was in the 80s was and will be like 30 like 50 years in the future. So like um there is a sense of that I actually feel here, where it's like this is not actually Los Angeles. Um, it's a there's a sense of it being retrofuturistic. This world, this it being like a version of the world that is contemporary, but is like where like these '80s workout vids are like huge, like now for some reason. And there's this sense that like this is a clearly kind of like this is the type of LA that you understand from movies. Like the way that you see LA represented stereotypically in movies is what the director and writer seems to be like almost like representing and like world building off of. But it is funny the ways that like it does, of course, intersect with like the real experience of Los Angeles, particularly this feeling of trying to chase happiness, and like it's so common to see people who are quote unquote successful in what they're doing and then who are like super depressed and super lonely, and then of course also being so image dependent on so many different ways, that having particularly adverse effects on a lot of women, a lot of um, femme presenting women people, like I think who have like this ticking clock like always sort of like thrust upon them. But yeah, that whole thing, the whole question of like whether this is a real issue that like female stars in Hollywood have to deal with, and whether this is really Los Angeles to begin with, is definitely like all over the entire movie, I think. But it is interesting how like as it goes on, it almost gives itself more license to be like, let me just like do whatever the hell I like. Let me just do this like weird concept that I just want to do this like campy thing. I don't know.
Yeah, some of the and to continue off of that, some of the things you were talking about, and let me preface this with I really did not like this movie because of like some of these things, but part of it is with all of what you've laid out, Jackie, the question of do I take this seriously, being sort of more, I guess, omnipresent throughout the movie feels like an irresponsible way of approaching is this a real problem, right? Like there's like this sense that I got that we're sort of trying to contend with what is superficial in the land in like LA, sort of the factory of fabrication in the US, right? And we're focusing on a very real issue about this loneliness, self-image, also, that problem of hotness that you mentioned. But then by us not being able to ground ourselves, there is also this sense that I like it almost seems to have ask a secondary question of like, is this a real problem, right? Like all of this fabricated world creates a fabricated problem that gets out of hand and ridiculous, and therefore the absurd becomes, I don't know, more of a joke by the end of the movie. Which then sort of when I digest the whole picture, I'm like, am I being driven to like continue this system, right? Am I also supposed to like when you think about the sort of simulacra of like sandwich that we have right here, right? It does end up being this sort of faded representation, but then I wonder how much effort is required to act like what is the point of that representation in the end, because I'm supposed to be reading some sort of symbol in it, but if it's just to read the symbol in and of itself, I really struggle with that, especially when when I can see that it's referencing something that's very, very deep and painful about the human experience, right? And like sometimes I feel like I'm trying to give it more worth in order to engage with you know roll credits the substance, right, of the film, right? It's
You're saying
it
that
that yeah.
Are you saying that like it kind of feels like this should be a because like it is like a like you know yeah it's like okay like there is a clear like feminist critique of the male gaze and like the way that women date themselves and like feel like they are forced in these positions where like they think that they have like a ticking after the age of 50, as Harvey says in this movie to her while eating like mayonnaise slathered shrimp at like a dinner. He says like everyone wants something new, and after 50, people just lose it. And she's like, "What is it?" And then he like can't answer that. He's like, But like clearly, the feminist, there is a clear feminist critique of like the way that we are like fetishize youth of women and like rob them of of meaningful aging, past like you could argue 40, but like certainly 50, especially if you are especially in uh, um, image obsessed cultures like Los Angeles or New York, whatever. Um, So that's a clear critique, but like what you're saying is that like it's so detached from reality, and it's so like tongue in cheek and so kind of like mediated that it's like that doesn't really land, and it feels like it's almost like a parody of that critique.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm saying. Yeah.
Totally. I'm glad we're saying it because I felt a really weird disconnect with this movie. Um, and I can't tell, and I guess that's partly why I wanted to do this podcast. Is like I can't tell if it's just not that good, or like in some deep level, like does it miss a point, or is there something more to be found here? Because I do think in these details that don't add up, there's something more interesting happening, like this question of is the substance a real thing that makes a young version of yourself, or is it something else? Are they actually the same person? Are they not? The movie doesn't even really answer that. Like, I think that's like interesting. Um, but yeah, I do think there's something that feels, and I don't know, maybe it's also certainly there are probably people who took a lot away from this movie, but I think kind of what you're saying, Jackie, like I do feel where I'm like, um, you know, did anyone go into this movie and find something new said about beauty standards? I'm like a little bit like, yeah, of course, it's kind of like the second the substance gets introduced, you're like, yeah, this is a bad idea. Like, of course, don't use the fucking thing that makes a young version of yourself.
Yeah, like who would
I don't
do
know.
that?
Or who would watch this movie?
Right.
Maybe people would do it in real life, but who would watch this movie and not be like, you know, I saw this TikTok this morning that this you can edit this out. It's not interesting. Do you know this meme format that's like I hope they play Hot to Go, and then it's like we're at blank. Um, anyway, but it was this. Okay, so it was like it's this meme that's going around now where it's like two people and it's like one person says, "I hope she plays Hot to Go," and then someone's like, "We're at the like dog fair," and then it'll like show like a girl singing a dog song, or like, "I hope they play Fiend," the Playboy Cardi song, and then it's like, "We're at like the Wallace and Gromit exhibit" was one I saw, and it's like Wallace and Gromit singing a song. So it's like this joke of like I think it comes from like Taylor Swift TikToks that were made where it would be people saying, "This is my wish list of what she's going to play," and then it would like be the song being played and them freaking out. But I saw one which was like, it was like, I like I hope they play I hope they play the Ozempic ad, and it was like, but we're at the Substance, and then it was like them playing an Ozempic ad in the theater before the Substance played.
I see, got it.
Like there is something to be said about like, yes, the critique in the movie is kind of shallow, but also it is a really real thing of like, as we create actual formulas and chemicals that can change our bodies. I mean, it's kind of simple, but it's like I have been saying this about Ozempic, where I'm like I do feel like in 10 years we're gonna be like, holy shit, I can't believe everyone used that shit for a year or whatever. Like, it is kind of like the Substance, but I don't know if this movie, by these tonal issues and by like, I don't know, there's just something that feels like either I'm missing a level of this movie or I don't know. Yeah.
I think it's because she's French. There's a French detachment. It's like,
Yeah.
she doesn't really give a
enough.
fuck. You know what I mean? But
Yeah.
like also, she's looking down her nose at LA because like it's to be mocked. But like and also I think that there's the sense that she's also like a lover of like LA movies, like LA like movies like the Hollywood. She makes a lot of references like Cronenberg, which is I guess he's Canadian, so again a little bit of the French influence there. So but then there's also a Carrie like illusion. There's also like there's a bunch of different like you could make a point that there's like The Shining is alluded to like with all these like straight hallway shots and stuff. There's a bunch of different stuff like that that's like clearly she's like working in this like filmic realm where she's like borrowing symbols from film rather than from real life. And there's the sense that like she's also kind of like from the surrealist like French surrealism genealogy where like it doesn't have to make sense. It's a movie. Like, it
Yeah.
doesn't have to make sense.
Yeah.
It's art. It's art, and therefore it's not like it's like the provocation is that it's not real. So you have to figure out if it's like an allegory or if it's a what it means, and it's like subjective to some degree. So there's I wanted to bring in the fact that the director and writer is in fact French.
One thing I did want to say is I do have a theory that, because I think it's happened with a lot of European filmmakers particularly, but also probably other, like, something about, because this is her first like studio Hollywood film, and I think it happened with Claire Denis with High Life, and I think it happened with Yorgos with The Lobster, of which I don't really like, but I know people love. But I think there is something to be said about someone working not in their primary language in a culture they don't understand, and often I feel like it turns into this like kind of awkward script where it's like it almost is like she feels timid about making it more complicated because she's not quite sure how people would talk in America, Like, think about if you tried to make a movie set in like Madrid, and it's like maybe you know a little bit of Spanish, but even if you do know Spanish really well, you'd still be like, well, is this how it works there?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. So I do think that detachment is also like inherent in this kind of project where it's like you're taking this like small time auteur and giving her $15 million and
Yeah.
saying make it English,
Okay, two things that are awakening in me because of that is like one, like this idea that, so what if it is actually detached? So like what if this really is saying that this is a problem? Because I kind of think that this may be the critique of the film, which is like a third wave, if not beyond, like feminist critique of this problem. Where like, what if it really is like detached in the sense that she's diagnosing these issues that exist in the LA world.
Yeah.
But she's like, I think it's stupid. Like, I think that she's like in her 40s or something, or 30s or 40s. Like, I think this shit is stupid. Like, I don't think that, because like I think that you can make the case that the Demi Moore character Elizabeth Sparkle has it all. Like, it's her own flaw that she is like buying into this idea that she needs to be youthful. Like, she could move to like North Dakota and find like the hottest guy ever. Do a Lana Del Rey, move to Florida, marry an alligator farmer. They're like, but like she is obsessed with herself in this way where she has the big poster of herself on her wall. Like, who does that? She's a narcissist, like. I think that there is like an outsider critique where it's like she's not empathizing and being like, oh, how sad, oh, poor like old like beautiful rich person, but she's saying like this is fucking stupid, like, and is making fun of it. She's making fun of that subjectivity as well as the male gaze, whereas some people might want it to feel a lot more like attuned to the actual experience, like empathetic. But like I think that she's not being empathizing fully with the protagonist. Maybe is one source of disconnect. Yeah. The other thing I wanted to say is that I feel like if I were like a younger, more like liberal brained, like annoying person, I feel like there's definitely room to make like a critique of this movie saying that it's like transphobic or something, because it's ploying off of the ideas of like dysmorphia or whatever, and it's also especially when the like mutant emerges,
and injections.
When the mutant emerges, there's injections. There's this idea that like, oh, we shouldn't cross that boundary. Like, we shouldn't like augment our bodies because then you never know what will happen. And then of course at the end, the mutant is essentially like the part where the hot girl injects herself and then becomes a true mutant in the way that she's like a lumpy, like hulking, like hunchback. She then does drag. She then puts on like a skirt and like a hot dress or whatever, and like tries to like puts on makeup and stuff and goes to the Oscars. And it's kind of this it's a JK Rowling-esque portrait of like a trans woman in a woman's bathroom who, as J.K. Rowling would say, is like a seal or something, like a walrus in a dress, like trying to be like, oh, I'm so normal, oh, I'm just a normal woman. It's like it's a super, you could make a case that this is like the ultimate like transmogrification into this like hulking mass of flesh that is not a woman,
Yeah.
So there's
That's so
something
interesting.
there that is also like detached from this sort of like, actual subjectivity, but is also saying like, let's make fun of this stuff because it's kind of like ridiculous
Yeah.
or whatever.
Yeah. And I actually, going off that, I think what the ending kind of struck wrong is that the horror is just that she's not hot anymore.
Right.
There is this, like, the movie buys into its own, like, its own critique of hotness is like, oh, well, we can't pursue the youth, and what happens if we try to pursue it is you become a monster. But, like, the monster is, as you're saying, just kind of presented as, like, a sad, not hot person. In the sense that, like, I don't know, it's really interesting. I think, like, maybe that's where I also felt disconnected from the movie's viewpoint, because it's like, and I was thinking, like, really what I want to talk about with this movie is, like, what does it mean to change? And, like, I think there's this interesting, because both with, if you mutate into a younger version of yourself, are you still the same person? Like, is Sue Lizzie or not? Because in kind of watching it, I'm like, she isn't the same person. This is just like, you birthed a person.
Right.
And then with the mutant at the end, this question of, like, even in some ways, that mutant could still move to North Dakota and find a nice farmer wife, husband, or whatever, and, like, live. So, like, why does the mutant have to die in the end? And I think it's interesting. I hadn't thought of it in that way, Jackie, but I think that's really true. And I think that's part of, I guess, why I want, and maybe that can be a next thing of, like, going into actually what the substance is, because it is coded as hormones. It's coded as, like, shooting up, estrogen, or, testosterone or something. And I think this, there's a really great essay by this, DJ Sprinkles, who's also, like, a theorist and writer, and they have an amazing article about glamour. And basically the argument is that to understand, like, the trans experience is to understand that for most trans people, they are always failing to attain the glamour that they wish for. That there's, like, always this inherent kind of seeking and failure in that experience. And she's trans, so, like, it was all this kind of feeling of, like, what is, like, when we talk about trans people, this was written in the 90s, so maybe it's a little different now, but it was like, talking about the trans experience, we often center, like, a Hunter Schafer, someone who, like, succeeds, I'm using air quotes, at, like, performing a version of glamour that society's accepted. But what happens if you can't? What happens, And I think that's interesting to bring into this
Absolutely.
movie.
And yeah. Okay. And then just quickly, maybe just kind of like end this kind of like trans divergence for the moment. I feel like there is a real, and again, this is something that it's funny how, like, culture itself mutates so quickly, but, like, I feel like even like 4 years ago, there were very heated online, I'm sure there are today too, but maybe I'm just not tapped into them as much, but, like, there were, like, really heated debates in the online trans community about this concept of, like, well, let me not even pose it as, basically what I'm resonating with is this idea of, like, again, like, the monster is the self-doubt. The monster is the self trying to be something that it's trying to, like, aspire to and to fit into a mold that it doesn't. But, like, there is beauty in all the different forms that this person takes. And the thing is, it's, like, really radical to be the mutant at the end and to accept yourself as beautiful.
Yeah.
That would be radical. But, like, instead of doing that, the figure tries to fit into what she previously was given props for being, right? She tries to fit into the skirt. She tries to fit into the makeup. I think there's and this represents this, like, line between, like, assimilation towards a standard beauty, a beauty standard, versus like an expansion of it and like attempting to create your own lane within beauty, which is always risking being laughed at and stuff. But yeah, always also has like its own audience that will truly appreciate it. And I think that is the thing is like you see that it's like made visible in the figure of the trans woman, but it actually is always existing in the figure of the cis woman
Yeah.
as well. Like the
Yeah.
cis woman also, many cis women cannot fit into like if
Yeah.
they try to wear makeup and like people are like, what the fuck are you doing? You know what I mean? So
Yeah.
it's not just a trans issue, but it's like it's played out through the spectacle of the trans woman.
Hmm.
But yeah, I think that's my main like critique of like that's why for me like beauty itself can play as a monster, like, but it's like the beauty that you would try to attain for yourself that you can't, like that attempting to fit this mold, this kind of restrictive constrictive mold is pretty scary if you think about it, because especially if you like really, because it draws you like a moth to the flame, right?
Hmm.
But yes, sorry, my brain is firing like crazy because all of that was so great. And I think the thing that maybe bothers me about this movie is exactly your point. Like, why is something that is so universal framed as something so comically absurd, right?
Mm.
Like, the idea of the mutant putting on the dress, putting on the earrings, and then going forth as sort of this true self to like almost claim oneself within a context that she is forced into, right? And like has the ghosts of her former self attached to her in all aspects of it. Like, why is that so like grotesque and detestable, or framed as detestable in the movie, when this is sort of like the like because it's not even saying that, oh, Demi Moore was beautiful from the start, right? Like that her true beauty was her original form, and like I don't know. I think that that lack of answers like starts to bother me. But I'll leave that aside.
Let me jump in because I'm having a little brain blast here about,
Yeah.
because I'm kind of realizing if you step back from this movie, it's not even really about beauty. Like it is about like aging and death in the sense of, because I'm realizing like, and I think the critique stands of, I think there's something that kind of un if I was making this movie, or if I was a studio executive helping this movie get made, I probably would have given the note like, if you make it so absurd, it feels like you're saying these feelings only affect someone like Lizzie Sparkle, versus like everyone feels this way. Who wouldn't want, to be able to recapture their youth? But I guess I'm just thinking because, you know, it's almost like the beauty aspect is why Demi Moore chooses a substance, but that other guy who's working as a doctor, a hot doctor, it's like he was doing it just because he wanted to be young again. And I actually think like what the substance actually is about is like, which is kind of a deeper movie that I actually don't think it really gets to, but we could maybe dive into here, is like, you know, like that what she's really searching for. It's less like an Ozempic kind of thing where it's like, oh, you can be a hotter version of yourself, even the glamour and it's more like we are all dying. I mean, I'm about to turn 30 in like 2 months, and I've started to have these thoughts. Not that that's old at all, but it's like I've started to have these thoughts of like, oh, these years of my life are going away. Like different kinds of age will occur, and you can never go back. You know, I
Oh,
don't know.
please. Lucas, you keep bringing me back to this thing. And one of my notes that I put in here, and I struggle to mention this because I have very limited scientific knowledge. But you're right. When you look back, the movie is less about beauty, but more about time and aging, which brings up, and this is addressing your question of like, what does it mean to change? And I keep thinking of like the concept of a half-life, right? She quite literally splits herself in half, blah blah blah, this and the third. But like, if the half-life is like, some sort of like how long, okay, I did Google this, let me just look it up really really quickly. Yeah, the amount of time it takes for half of the atoms present to decay, right? If that's like the definition, or the like very loose definition of a half-life, right? Like, over as we combat with time, we have to look at like our like former versions of ourselves as like kind of half-lives, right? Like, this is the era of your youth, this is the
Yeah.
era of your prime. But in that time, not only does it speed up, like our perception of time speeds up, but also like the time that you have gets cut in half each time, right? Like, as you enter old age, you have less time to live. So when you are 20, 100% of your life is like a portion of your 80s, right? And that hour is like a second now, and like you have to like you're maybe chasing like some sort of like paralysis of that. And this is where like the concept around Botox and all of these other injections come into this movie, and that maybe lends itself to the beauty side of things. And then, if you will allow me to go the sort of like Cronenberg route with like the radioactivity concept of like creating cancer, right? Like, we're also talking about two types of cancer representation, like the cancer of society, vanity, being a plague upon our self-image and how we see ourselves, and how society can hold us slave to a bunch of things. But also, like, with all of this cell what is it called, cell division, but whatever, like the process of multiplying cells, creating cancers in our body, also create like making sort of grotesqueries of us in various ways, whether we try to treat that cancer and it sort of turns us, transforms our bodies in different ways. There's like a conversation that I'm trying to get to around illness, I think. And maybe we can table that, because I think that kind of moves us a little bit away from the movie. But I keep thinking of like the toxicity that the quote unquote the substance and what it means for society as like the core of the film, but that's not addressed, right? Like, we aren't really like the substance just acts and does its thing, but like it keeps skirting around the actual sort of the disembodied voice, right?
Yeah. Well, and
Sorry, I tried
also,
to.
I no, can I jump in? Is that
Yeah,
good?
yeah, please. I was just trying
Um,
to fit a lot into one small.
yeah, yeah. No, I think it's so true, and I think when you look at it that way, it's like, who would ever take I think this was my weirdness with the movie. It's like, who would ever take the substance? Because it just makes a new version of yourself, or a creature who's birthed from you, who steals your life. I'm like, and it's like, if you think about, let's say, the best version of the substance, like this, the doctor, hot doctor, and the old man, it's like, the old man ages normally. Like, you're not gaining time, you're just losing time. And I think that's what's like, was confusing watching this movie, where I'm like, and this is where maybe it breaks down a little bit of like, maybe a Cronenberg, say, would have maybe gone a little bit deeper, which is like, what really, and also the fact that it seems like the substance is bad for everyone who takes it. So who is making the substance, and who, like, I almost wish this would be the more classical ending, would have been like, it's all an experiment, and whoever's making the substance, it's actually going to be used for, creating mutants to fight war. Like, there could have been a more like because the substance as an actual product, a substance as something you would sell in a supermarket, doesn't make any sense. Because like, and I think that was like the weirdness I felt watching this whole movie. And this is what I liked about them. There's a lot I liked about the movie. I did not dislike it, but I think like one of the things I really liked was this like discomfort of like, think about having this creature, I'm calling Sue a creature, but anything that is like connected to your life, and it's never really clear how they're connected. Like there's this like really weird, and that's kind of where the part where the horror really worked for me was like kind of the second act where Demi Moore is slowly realizing like you never get this back. You know, like you don't get your body's decaying, it doesn't come back. And the sunk cost fallacy of like, you know, and that's where again it's kind of interesting because I think a more traditional movie would have given answers of like it could have been clear like she needs money, so she needs to have the younger version of herself make money to sustain their lifestyle. Like that would have been one like reason to take the substance. Or they could have had it be clear that like because I kind of thought they were doing this, but they never really of like, oh, is she conscious in the body of the young person and like experiencing pleasure? Like for it's interesting for a movie that's all about like glamour and Hollywood and money and leisure. And this is where I think it's cool. For all that, there's very little pleasure in this movie. There's very little like no one takes that much joy in anything. Even the sex that the young Sue has does not seem is not presented in like a sexy kind of way. And it's actually about like a total loss of pleasure. And I think that's interesting.
Yeah, because the Sue, even though Sue is like, and like this is something we haven't really taken apart too much, but it kind of goes without saying if you watch the movie that like Sue ends up being a different person with the same memories maybe as
Yeah.
Elizabeth Sparkle, but she has the memories. She knows what sex is. She knows what sex is with a young guy. Like
Yeah.
it's not that
Yeah.
great. You know what I mean? Like, and so that's why I'm so like okay. I love the idea that like Sue is like a creature because like I kept thinking about like this is like a werewolf movie, but like the werewolf is a young person, a young version
Yeah.
of yourself. And that also had me thinking that like, you know, I think this movie again like when you introduce these allegories that are more like when they're detached from reality enough, then it kind of makes everybody like scramble and put their own like meanings onto it. That's like the benefit of an allegory, or like a that's the benefit of an unreal presentation of something. Is that you have to be like, oh, what does this mean? It could mean this, it could mean that. But like one of the things it could be is like, oh, it's about celebrity itself. The substance is celebrity. Because why do we want celebrity? You know, like in the same sense of why would anyone want the substance? Like, what does it do for you? But like what it actually does, if you do get famous as a young person, is it haunts the rest of your life with this image of what you once were, right? And so then, like, even as you're dying, and like, if you could think about the movie as representing the legacy of the person as opposed to the life of the person, the legacy is, and then there's like these different versions of the person that are fighting for what the legacy is. Is the legacy this hot young person? Is the legacy this old lonely person? Is the legacy this mutant other thing that is like I don't know, maybe the person like actually breaks and decides to go like, you know, schizo mode on everybody and like maybe goes to the award ceremony and like, you know, actually sheds blood or whatever, like or whatever. Like there's all sorts of ways that you can mutate your legacy at the end of life, right? But other than that, you can decide to fade away and let the younger self become your what you are, or you can say like in a kind of, or you can be like no, like I want you guys to see me as I age into death. Like I want you guys to see this too, you know.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's kind of another one of these like
This is
readings of it that you could like roll your eyes at, but it's like very much there, which is like, oh, like the movie's about celebrity. Like the substance is celebrity.
Yeah, I mean, and taking that because that was really really fun because you got to a point like while you when you said legacy, I was literally writing legacy down because the route that I was thinking to also add, and we have to throw this away because we're just putting too many ideas in it, was just parenthood, right? Like parents create children who create monsters, like, but that being like a genetic legacy that you're trying to leave on the world, and like, you know, trying to get your child to, you know, take over the family business, etc. But this painful process of that being fully like driven by self, right? Or like selfishness, which links to like the celebrity thing where it's like, oh, I by sort of submitting myself to the gods of celebrity or the substance of celebrity, I'm sort of offering myself up for candidacy for legacy. But then, as we see, the movie is starting where that legacy is dying, right? And back to your question about like, are these two like, are they the same person or different people? To society, they are different people. Even in that interview, right, in the movie, when the guy's like, did you ever watch like Liz Sparkle? And they like, she references herself as a like old vestige, like as the creature that's napping in the bathroom, right?
She throws shade on herself. She says
Yeah.
like, "Oh, she was such a big inspiration," which in girl talk means like, yeah, she's so washed. You know what I mean? Like, I'm the new her.
Yeah. Right. And like, I don't know. I think that that's a fun take that you've allowed me to go on. But yeah, I often think that like the rolling your eyes at celebrity being the substance is where I always fall back to. Like even if I pull all these images together, right? Like I try to make a mutant out of all of the things that I'm seeing, all of the themes that are being presented to me. I'm still just like, well, what the fuck? You know what I mean? Like, and not in like a super pejorative way, what the fuck, but more so just like, well, like, what the fuck train was I supposed to be on? Like, I'm just out here lost. There's an explosion and a dissolving face, and now I'm like, it's over? You trapped me here. Anyway.
Can I go on? Okay, you have unlocked something for me. Of maybe I'm turning around on maybe I can find the genius here in the tone.
Okay.
Because I think when you're talking about legacy, I think the thing I kept coming back to is, but they're making a fucking fitness video that
Hmm.
has no substance.
Right.
There is no substance in this movie. And I actually, now I'm like, that's kind of maybe the point. And like maybe part of why it feels so
Mm.
inane is like underneath everything, there's nothing to gain here. Because also, the life that Demi Moore is living, and like the guy who gets the older man who from her high school is presented as such a fucking dunce. Like, it would be
Mm.
different if that guy who, in some ways, the language of the film is trying to say Demi Moore should have just been with that guy from high school. That's who she
Hmm. Can
deserves.
you
But
spell
like
that
the
out
movie,
for the people who haven't
oh
seen
yeah,
it?
so for about 20 minutes into the movie before she's taking the substance she runs into a guy from her high school who's a balding 50 something sort of kind of the accountant from the valley archetype of like you know and was like and he's the only person who's like you're the hottest person I've ever seen to Demi Moore as a 50 something. He's kind of and he's represented in the movie language as the choice she should have taken, basically, of like
Yeah,
she should have.
decent guy, like a
Yeah,
nice,
yeah,
pretty like normal
you know,
guy.
yeah. And it's like kind of how I read it was like she should have just not taken the substance, accepted that she's not a star anymore, and married a boring accountant. But now I'm kind of coming around on the movie does not present him as a good option at all.
Hmm.
He doesn't seem, he's not charming. He's not cute in an older, like they could have cast not a hot, 50 something, but they could have cast like a charming older man, character actor or someone. But instead they choose someone, I don't really remember what he looks like, but like clearly he's presented as a joke, like the rest of the movie. Like he is a joke of an older man. And in some ways, and I think that was what was actually kind of scary in this movie, is like also her life when it's kind of working. There's a little period where they're going back and forth, the 7 days on, 7 days off. And what Demi Moore ends up doing is watching TV and eating food, basically. And it's like, there is something kind of profoundly horrifying about in the movie itself. There is nothing. I'm coming back to this, like, there's no pleasure. Like, there is nothing in this movie that is like positive of like the legacy is a stupid fitness show. There's no art in the movie. It's not like Lizzie Sparkle is saying I could make a star. It's not Sunset Boulevard where it's like I'm ready for my close-up. I want to be in a film that will last time. And the life that she would live if she didn't take the substance is also really bad. There's nothing in the
Yeah,
movie that's like positive.
it's depraved
And
vanity. Like, yeah.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's almost now if I really leaned into that, I'm like I could come around on the tone in the entire movie of like it's actually underneath it. There's like a deep existential nightmare of what if there is no good option? What if, there is no, nothing to do. There's nothing to gain, anywhere.
I'm only buying what you're selling because you said existential nightmare. Because I think
Yeah.
I was like, yeah, is the I think what in my letterbox I was like, is the big trick on me that I'm looking for some substance where there isn't any in the end of the movie, right?
Yeah.
And I'm just like, damn it, you know what I mean?
It's
Yeah.
such a
that yeah.
no. It's
Go
so
on.
it's so French. Like the things that we're talking about are like, oh, celebrity is overrated. Like, oh,
Yeah.
like maybe the meaning is that there is no meaning. Like all these things are so
Yeah.
like, but yet like it does that. Like it is a great conversation movie. Like it's a great
Yeah.
conversation movie for like I want to be like elitist towards the people that are like having these conversations after the movie, but like I'm having this conversation on a
Yeah.
podcast. Like
Yeah.
Right.
you know what I mean? Like
mean-
yeah, but it really does like get you on like on. You can make all these like, oh, what does it say about this? What does it say about that? And it's like you can find all these like, oh, what if it's supposed to be the fact that we can't find this or that? Like, yeah, I don't know. I'm just kind of being self-aware of that in a way, like.
I mean, my self awareness is it's a great conversation movie that I'll probably talk about for the rest of my life, but I will never watch it again.
Really?
It's
Okay,
just
so
long.
wait. I mean,
Oh.
I actually really enjoyed. I gotta be honest. Like, I was so like at some point it
Yeah.
actually was okay. My theater going experience. I actually did start to. I saw it as like pretty fun. I saw it as funny and sad. I saw it as like pitiable and funny for most of it. Especially once we started. Like honestly, once they started doing these like really really languorous male gazy like parodical male gazy shots. I was like, this is funny and also uncomfortable, and I love that it's uncomfortable and funny and also hot. Like it's working on all three levels for me. And then like as it went on, like even when the mutant was trying to like dress up and go to the Oscars, I was like, that is so sad. Like you're this person. If I were this person, if I were Demi Moore, I wouldn't have taken the substance, right? Supposedly as a subject watching the thing, and not as like a 50-year-old actress who was once blah blah blah. But I was like, I would not take the substance. But the fact that she did is so sad, and it's like okay,
Yeah.
I resonate with that, and it's also like okay, a classic sci-fi trope. The fact that the mutant decided to go to the Oscars after seeing what it looked like, what she looked like another thing that I was like, that's so sad, and like, why would she do that? But also, I'm like, it's like, why would you do that? But it's also like, this is hilarious that the movie is going there, and it's also like. It's like sad. You feel for the person, like
Yeah.
you're like you want this thing, like you've been told that you want this thing and so you want it, and I feel like I was like I remember there were times when I would be like laughing like a little bit, and I would like feel my neighbors to the left judging me, or my neighbors to the right would be laughing, and I would be judging them for laughing a little bit. And like those moments where you slip up and laugh a little bit, and someone else is like you can sense that they're like, oh, this is actually really sad, or this is really fucked up, or whatever. There's a lot of like this horror sadness, comedy thing.
I guess it's interesting because my movie going experience was everyone was laughing the entire time. And
Wow.
it was, I would say it was a packed LA audience, in Burbank, 8 p.m. on a Thursday. And it was really raucous. And I had a great time watching this movie. Like nothing, like I was laughing the entire time. I was like, because also I think we haven't talked about an hour and a half into this podcast is it's a really fucking gross movie. That's super gory
Yeah, it's very-
and disgusting.
yeah.
And like, it was the first movie that made me nauseous in a long time. During the ending, there was a moment when I was like, I need to look away from the screen because I'm like actually getting slightly upset by like how gross everything is. And so like all of those aspects to me, I hear what you're saying, Jackie, and I think that's maybe what I'm feeling now analyzing it is like there is a deeper sadness to this movie. There is a tragedy. But I would say my experience watching the movie was very much like this is a joke. And I think the movie is a joke of itself. And I think in some ways, I think that's why A, it's 45 minutes too long, and B, I think the ending fails it, actually, because I think they play the tragedy of this woman monster beast thing going to on the stage as a parody, as a joke. They play the 2001 A Space Odyssey music, which is like, I found very jarring and distasteful in some ways. Of like, I don't know, there's something about the ending where I was like, there's a version of this where I really would have felt the relentless pursuit of fame or youth or beauty or whatever it is. I would have really been like, wow, I feel how this tragic flaw led to this ending. But how they kind of play it is more to me the JK Rowling transphobia of like, haha, look at this monster trying to be a woman, which didn't really work for me, I guess.
Can you remind me what the ending really was? I can't actually really remember.
So, if I recall correctly, the ending is like Sue is dressed up, ready for this New Year's Eve like big event. Starts to actually deteriorate because she's ran out of her extra spinal
She's already
fluid or
killed.
whatever.
She killed
Right.
herself.
She's been harvesting
Yeah,
the
she-
spinal fluid that she can inject to keep it prolonged.
Yeah.
But then she's starting to
Right.
her form is starting to mutate and decay, right?
Yep, she's starting to, and she's like getting ready. Like I really okay, and yeah, she's starting to mutate. Fast forward to she runs back and remembers the activation serum, right? And the thought is she's going to activate again, be an even hotter, younger, the 15-year-old. And then that's when, Cronenberg monster Sue Lizosaurus appears. Goes to the event. We're going to fast forward all that stuff. But then she gets attacked, right? There's the Carrie moment, gets attacked, and then kind of like chased out of the building.
Wait, did she get attacked by the people who are in the audience?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
these are also allegedly like these would be also actors and people in the industry, you know. So like that's another like allegorical detail. But they're that, but they're also like the audience, right? The mob,
and they're presented particularly as the producers and studio executives of the studio, like older men who with Dennis Quaid, who like are there to ogle at girls, basically.
But then they attack.
And there's
her.
also that child. Do you remember the child in the audience? And that all the dancers on stage that were supposed to be next to Sue are topless?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, right.
And that being really weird?
Yeah, it's a weird fucking,
Weird fucking... And then after the big
and then she
blood...
just sprays blood everywhere.
Yeah, sprays blood everywhere. And then I think the final scene is like she's running out and then trying to find her star, right? As like she's deteriorating, falling apart fully, and then it's only Demi Moore's face on top of a blob that's like struggling to like.
It's like The Thing, the John Carpenter's The Thing, like just sloughing along.
Yep.
Yeah.
Exactly. And then dissolving right on her star to then be cleaned away by the street sweeper, kind of, very haphazardly in the end.
Yeah, the flesh really is just like gum on the sidewalk compared to the films that you've made, like as an actress, right? Like that's and so that's why I come back to this idea that like there's this cyclical relationship between like fixating on one's own youth because that's what's been propped up, but then you can't really succeed in it in your older life. So then what can you even become if not like a psycho on the sidewalk of Hollywood Boulevard, you know?
I got notes of addiction there too. It was...
It's interesting too, like that ending with the going to the Walk of Fame. Again, I keep coming back to basically there is another version of this movie that would have been much more traditionally art house filmy. I don't know if it would have been better because in some ways I'm like it would be more obvious of like if she was trying to make a movie, like because like the fame of these workout videos is so dumb.
Yeah.
Like everything about this studio and her life is so dumb
Uh-huh.
that it's hard for me in the ending, like when she gets to the Walk of Fame and she dies and gets swept up in this, it's like, is there any eternal fame? Because I live 5 minutes away from the Hollywood Walk of Fame. There's a lot of names on there that we don't know who they are. So like there is like a deep existential thing about like no amount of fame, no amount of life is gonna stop the fact that we all are gonna die one day, and we can't escape that fate. Like that's a deep, tragic thing. But the movie doesn't really dramatize that, and I don't know if that's an interesting choice or a mistake.
I, even just thinking about the Walk of Fame itself, like this thing that people are supposed to step on, and like I'm supposed to be looking down, or if you get your star, you're gonna bend down to kiss it to be like, yes, finally, like I'm on the ground. I don't know, but it not referencing, I don't know. Yeah, I'm still paralyzed by that, and I don't think I have anything interesting to say beyond what you've already said, Lucas. Yeah.
There's a larger theme of like escape from LA and escape from the coasts that I would like to tap into more at some point in this podcast, because that's a big theme that I see a lot of people struggling with right now. Like, and the larger question is like these molds in general, these molds of success and fame that are not just image obsessed, but they're also literary obsessed. They're also money obsessed. They're also all these different molds. And like yeah, like so but like it's okay. One little quick thing I wanted to say about that is like, okay, so like the older Demi Moore, like the original Elizabeth Sparkle 50-year-old, takes the thing and it succeeds to some extent in a compromised way of returning her to some sort of like primary state, which in fact is not herself as a young person, but like a fake young person. It's a weird thing. And then trying to repeat that, if you look at it like as a generational thing, so the older person does something, it kind of works. Then the younger version of that person does the same thing, and it doesn't work at all. I think that that's like an apt representation of this moment we're in, where it's like we can't reproduce the same success that the generation before modeled because it doesn't work that way anymore. And maybe in trying to do so, we will like see the most radical change, even though we're trying to reproduce the same sorts of success and the same sorts of personhood that like our predecessors displayed.
Film as an argument for innovation.
Yeah, like getting outside of this, like reiterating the same sort of youth and the same sort of cycles, and being like, let's find out what this thing really is, like once we accept our fate or whatever.
Yeah. Well, two things I wanted to say to that. One is I did read an interview I thought was really interesting. I've been thinking about a lot, and maybe I should have said earlier of like, I remember the director saying they purposefully had, because there's a moment where we see young Lizzie Sparkle and it's young Demi Moore and it's not Margaret Qualley. So they're making a clear distinction that Sue is not Lizzie Sparkle when she was 22. She is a new creature out of her DNA, or a new woman out of her DNA, if you want to be kind. And I thought that was really interesting in the context of the themes of the movie of like, it would be a different movie if she was literally just a 22-year-old version of Demi Moore, or, age swapped CGI Demi Moore plays herself. Like that would be a very different movie. But the fact that it is purposely like a next generation, a different person. But I don't know. I guess I keep coming back as you're talking, Jackie, about like, I think that's where I can't tell if this is a fault or a bug or a feature of the life that Lizzie Sparkle's living in LA is so stupid and bad. Like, her, like, there's no, like, thinking about addiction, I'm like, there's very few parts of this movie where it has that sense of like, oh, she's gaining something from any of this, it, and that's where the unreality of the movie is kind of unsettling in an interesting way, because it's like, it would be different if there was a North Dakota coded aspect of the movie. I mean, I come back to like that guy that she's supposed to date by the logic of the film language of the film. Like, that guy is not presented as a change or to a better, you know. Like I think like in the movie itself, it's kind of saying there is no escape from LA.
Yeah, you know
Like
that kind of is LA though, because like even the Nebraska guy, if he's a 50-year-old in LA, he's signed on to LA. You know what I mean? And that
yeah,
almost kind
yeah,
of like makes him seem more pitiful. The fact that the Nebraska guy is in LA as a 50-year-old, right? As opposed to
yeah,
Nebraska. If
yeah,
he's in Nebraska, he's a normal like nice guy. If he's in LA, it's like what are you doing here?
yeah,
And that's what he is doing in the movie too. Is like, what exactly are you doing here?
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, there's a lot of falsehoods, right, that we're operating, like trying to make meaning out of, right? Like even as you were mentioning, Lucas, like the interview being like, oh, we purposefully made these two separate people. Like, so it's a lie then. The substance rule saying that you are one is a lie.
Mm-hmm.
And,
hmm,
this guy from Nebraska being in LA is also some sort of like fabrication of who he might want to seem to be, right? Like the call me, writes his number on a piece of paper, but then it drops in mud, and then he's like, "Oh, this is my true self. I'm kind of gross and not like my representation is or is tarnished in your eyes and tarnished sort of perpetually." But the film is trying to say, "Oh, and that's the good route. That's like the good ending in this quest." So that also feels, that's the film lying to us as well, but I don't know what to do with those. I feel
Mm-hmm.
like they're the only things I can grasp onto, and maybe that's another meta portion of the movie where it's like if I'm supposed to escape from LA with the dregs of that city, then where do I go to, and who am I trying to pretend to not be LA at that point
yeah.
outside of the city? Or following that metaphor, like who then do I become if I leave this
Yeah.
behind?
And it's interesting in that context too that the other person we see take the substance is not a fame person at all. It's a person who just wanted to be a young hot doctor, I guess. There's no real reason given for why that guy took the substance or why he's a doctor or nurse or whatever. Like, that's interesting too.
There is also
And that's not a. I was just gonna say it's not a glamorous job. Continue.
not a glamorous job
Yeah.
because like the thing is about the substance is like you still have to work as both things. So like it's
Yeah.
another way that like reality slips away from this movie because it's like okay if you're gonna take the substance then that means that like you have to get two jobs and they each have to take a week off like every other week.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like he can only work for famous people. But like yeah. But yeah, there
Again, I think a more traditional movie could have had a scene where it was like Lizzie Sparkle and someone says, "You need to make $1 million or else you're going to lose the house." And so she's
mhm
like, "Oh, well, if I make a young version of me who gets this job, I could live on vacation all the time."
mhm
Like, I don't know. It feels like there's something missing of like, what does she actually want in any of this?
mhm
She doesn't really take pleasure in attention in the film. Like, we don't see Lizzie Sparkle
mhm
basking in attention or enjoying attention,
mhm
um, which is kind of what the whole movie is about. It's like, why do you go to the Oscars at the end as the mutant beast? Because you want the attention of this audience. You want recognition and attention. Like, that's really what drives the character, but we don't really see her get attention, if that makes sense.
and is that because she's like 50, you know?
Yeah, yeah,
Because the younger version of herself does get attention and does kind of revel in it a little bit, like
yeah,
Sue.
yeah,
But but it is a good point. I mean, like I think that a big theme of this movie also is like um, how much of your own desire is simply imported from like the external world, and it's just imprinted upon you. You know what I mean? Um, and it's not a real desire. It's not a deep. It's not like a true desire.
yeah.
Yeah, because now I'm beginning to question, like, what did Sue even want, really? Like,
Yeah.
Yeah.
And this comes back to the eternal question I'm having this entire podcast. It's just like, is it poorly written or is it trying to do something I don't get? Where I'm like, in some ways, I'm like, Lizzie and Sue have no internal life. Sue, and I think that's kind of when the movie falls apart, is when Lizzie becomes a creature monster who, because we haven't even talked about how she becomes like a weird reptilian thing, you know, but it's like Sue as a character. I remember talking to someone because also it was interesting that there was a lot of Demi Moore for the Oscars debate before this movie came out. People were saying she was going to win the Oscar for Substance. I don't think that's even a distinct possibility because it's a crazy fucking movie. But I remember I went into the movie with this sort of like Demi Moore and Margaret Qualley are like the big actresses and they're going to give this performance. I was like, Margaret Qualley doesn't get shit to do. She's a great actress, but like, she doesn't do anything.
She's
in this
just
movie.
a
She
hot
looks,
body, yeah.
smiles,
She doesn't
yeah.
have a juicy role, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know. There was just like there's something weird and interesting about like to make the ending to be obscure about what is the actual connection between Sue and Lizzie. Are they one thing or two different things? Do they have the same desires or different desires? That's one question. And then the second question is to end the movie with Sue taking the substance. Is like weird because I'm like, I don't get Sue. Like to me, she still kind of feels like a robot toy lady.
It is kind of scary. I mean, I mean, we could go on. Like, you know, I feel like this is the type of movie that, like, again, like, invites sophomoric analyses that you can endlessly circulate about it.
Yeah.
Because it's like Sue actually is kind of scary. Like now I'm thinking like, oh, Sue actually is kind of scary because it's like a proto-human actually. Like, you know, it's like it's like a copy of a human that like it is kind of the thing coded. It is kind of like alien, but if the xenomorph was a human instead of xenomorph, like so it's like what the fuck is this thing? You know what I mean? Like it's like Sue is also kind of like a creature, even though she's like super
going
hot.
off. Yeah, it's like. Again, this would be a more traditional movie, and I don't know if that would technically be better. But like, that's why I kept waiting for something to be like, oh, the substance is actually trying to eat these people to create a new proto-human. Like something of like it feels like the movie is missing this layer because it doesn't make sense as what it's set up to be.
And I know you have to go, Lucas, but like I wanted like it was also interesting to think about Chud and the substance in Chud.
Yeah.
Because you were during that episode, you were talking about like the bureaucracy and the red tape being like a part of what the real horror is. And in this one too, I feel like it's not the red tape, but it's like the banality of the like libertarian medical world that we have, where like you can just kind of like put some random shit out there and see what happens, and like you know no one knows what's going to happen long term. Like it probably will fuck us all up and give us cancer. Like all these. Whether it's Red 40 or Ozempic or like a number of other things, you know? Yeah. So it's like, but like you can sell it in terms of like health and beauty and whatever else.
Yeah.
You can advertise it on a podcast, you know? And like no one's really checking in America.
Yeah. It's like I've had this experience recently of like I've been trying to really get healthy, as I kind of alluded to. But then it's like I've started drinking more Diet Coke. And I'm like, is this worse for me? Yeah. Or like drinking more coffee? Like, it's kind of like no matter what you do, you are ingesting chemicals and materials. And I don't know.
That's when, as well, like what Josh was saying, like everything's a lie here. But of course, because it's a fucking of course it is, because it's like a sci-fi movie about whatever, about like an evil substance. But like, the idea that you are one is a lie, and the idea that like a better you is also clearly a lie. But like these are like obvious points, but like the movie makes you make them.
Yeah, it's also interesting because going back to her being French, some of my friends just stayed in Marseille for the summer in France, and they were talking about how the food there is so much healthier and less toxic and chemically.
Right.
But there is something to be said about, particularly for foreigner coming to America, maybe this movie as a reaction to America specifically of like, we are ingesting the chemicals, we are making the chemicals, literally.
Baudrillard is actually a perfect symptom of this, like the French fascination with America and being like, America's so crazy. And then, of course, Americans love that shit because we're all narcissists. So we love to be seen. Yeah. We love to be like, oh my god, we are crazy. Oh my god, we are living in a fantasy world. Like, we are so toxic. You know, like... But yeah, that's another tangent of like the French-American like mutual fascination. America loves to be seen by anything, like including like Japan or whatever else. Like they love to be like seen and like looked like appreciated, quote unquote. You know. Yes.
Yeah, and I think it's also interesting that the Substance, talking about bureaucracy, is not medically. It is underground.
That's true.
You know? She takes it illegally. She's sent to, basically, the hood is how it's represented in the movie, like to the slums, you know, to get the substance from this weird box. And, like, there's something interesting about that. I'm thinking about Chud, where it's like, if Chud also represented mutancy as coming from the kind of the sewers, the underground, the less fortunate, the homeless. This movie also has a weird thing of like, you know, it's presented kind of in a comic way of like the actress has to go down to the scary boarded up shop to get the substance. Like, again, I wish it kind of had gone more into that. I think a more interesting movie would have, instead of the mutant third act, you had a third act where Sue tries to figure out what the fuck the substance is. Maybe the mutant's still part of it, but I think like it feels like it's missing a statement on actually what the substance is.
That's true.
You know.
Yeah, I think about that specific aspect, sort of in contrast to like Sorry to Bother You, with the like sapien thing, and like there's a moment where Liz Sparkle, and I know we're sort of running out of time, but there's a moment where Liz Sparkle hears sort of a mutant, or what I perceive to be the eventual mutant, like as she's getting more formula, like in the room. Do you remember that scene?
And I remember being like, I didn't get it.
Yeah, I didn't get it at first, and then I was actually kind of upset that at the end of the movie it was referenced but not even expanded upon. Like, we didn't see more of these things. We just knew that people would eventually try to like reactivate, and then that somehow this is like known to the Substance company. But yeah, it just there are so many things where I'm like, oh, I wanted this to be a movie, a different movie, but then you're right, like would it have been a quote unquote better movie, right? I wanted signposts that I enjoyed or something like that.
This was a really enjoyable movie to watch, and it clearly struck a chord. It made $35 million, like, which is big for a movie like this. And I think there's something interesting about, I think it is mostly striking a chord positively with people. I feel like people are responding to it. It's sparking memes on the internet. The Substance clearly has captured people's attention. So I think it's interesting to look at. It's like, what, I guess maybe I'm just a contrarian at heart, where like I almost want to say I'm glad this movie isn't the more art house Cronenberg movie where they like find a conspiracy at the end. There's something more interesting being done, even if maybe personally my taste wise it's not exactly what I like or what I look for in a movie like this. Like, there's something really unique happening in this movie that does feel different.
I think that there's like a my intuition is that there's like a girl catharsis watching this movie, like Carrie. Like, I think that but like it's the Carrie of the contemporary age, like where everything is, all the signals are so crossed. It's so insane to like be. It's so confusing sometimes being a girl, as Charlie XCX would say in Brat.
Yeah.
But there's like,
okay, should we talk about Substance and Brat culture?
Yeah, talk about substancelessness, whatever. No, but honestly, the mutant is kind of brat coded. Am I wrong?
Like, yeah.
It's like if she had
She would've
green
gone to
blood,
the
it would
sweat
be
tour.
so brat to like explode all over your haters. Like, no, but
Yeah.
seriously, like, I think that there's like a real catharsis in like all these different constellations of the self and image and like the male gaze and like this
Yeah.
gaze and that gaze and like is Harvey gay or is he just like or is he like a predator or like what's his
Yeah,
deal?
yeah.
Like there's so many different like contortions of like the image and like desiring this beauty so much that like the figure of the mutant, I would argue the figure of the like mutant version of Sue of and by extension of Elizabeth Sparkle is relieving for the subject watching it who identifies with these people, right? Who identifies with Elizabeth Sparkle and then as with Sue. It's relieving to be like, we're all just a fucking ball of disgusting flesh. Like, let's just like that's what we are. I think there's a big catharsis moment there that feels good, feels relieving. I think that's part of the resonance of it in a world that is so TikTokified, like because TikTok is like a bunch of these meaningless movements, and that's how you get famous is by like contorting your body or your face in certain ways that like robotically catch on. Like there's no art there, like it's not like an expression of the soul, and it's all like contorting yourself into a certain shape. And I think that the although it does read like a little bit like a cop out, it also provides this like big catharsis moment that feels like it has a positive gut reaction, you know, like this like vomit feeling of like, oh, let me like throw up all this like toxins within me that have to do with this image and stuff. And you couldn't really do that necessarily if you also explored the seedy underbelly of what is the Substance Corporation, what does this stuff really mean?
Yeah.
Or even if you did have even if you did have like a precise meaning of it, maybe it wouldn't do the same. Like just kind of like let's just fucking good.
Yeah, yeah. And clearly what caught on too is the fact that the substance is this unique, weird green thing. You know, like I'm just thinking about like the memes that have been made about this movie. It's like something caught on that will live way past this movie of like, I don't know if people saw the meme where it was what's his name? Gene Wilder and one of these hot boy actors where it's like he took the substance. Oh, it was the guy from The Bear. It was Jeremy Allen White. They're like, that was Gene Wilder taking the substance.
Yo,
I put it in the chat. It's
was
funny.
Gene okay, yeah.
But I just think I think the substance, this idea of like you create this, the unknowability of the substance and it has no purpose, I think is part of what makes it a strong image, you know?
It has been a pleasure having you on, Lucas, once again. I feel like this actually weirdly pairs well with the Chada episode. It's kind of like low and high.
No, yeah, I think
low
so.
Mutant and the high mutant in a way. Lucas, do you have anything you want to direct anyone to before you head out of here?
I mean, Cusper Magazine, the literary journal that I run, issue 3 is coming out. Will probably be in about a month from when this podcast goes out, and check us out, subscribe to our Substack. We have a lot of content coming, maybe a podcast in the future, we'll see, so check it out.
Cool. It's a fun magazine to check out. There's quite a lot there. We'll have a link to their Substack in the description.
Hell yeah.
Thanks for coming back on. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you for having me anytime.
Sometime.
Yeah. Always a pleasure. And honestly, this has made me like the Sub movie a lot more. Now I'm like,
I was
maybe
about to say.
like now I'm like, oh wait, maybe this is a really provocative, interesting, like deep film that has a kind of stupid, silly surface that I was looking at, you know?
Who's to say?
Who's to say?
Okay.
All right.
Great to see you. Goodbye.
Good job, guys. Nice to see y'all. Be on here again soon. Bye.
And Josh, do you have anything you'd like to direct anybody to before we wrap up here?
In DC, on your ballot, the ballot initiative 83 is ranked choice voting, and then another element that I keep forgetting about it, but it helped the city become more democratic. And so I know the big ticket is what people are looking at often, but there's other stuff on your ballot. So if you are choosing to engage, please engage with other, you know, forms of democracy to help make your places better, right? You know, still go to the polls to do other work, is what I'm saying.
Totally. Love that. Okay, cool. Yeah, I will plug the. We have an Instagram, YouTube, and Spotify are our main things. If you could follow us on all those places, rate us highly on all those things, engage with us on all those things, that would be great. Sometimes it feels like something went wrong, and that's why we're here. That we're in some kind of cosmic cage or simulated psy-op. We become in the face of simulations and psy-ops, and from wrongness spring. Syncretism is for the honorable and dishonorable alike. In thought and in body, no one, not two, in sky and seed sown, we dream up shadows to love through, and hold their calloused hands, shaping change in the nether pool from breath to breath, and coming up again and again, seeking vistas of freedom. Learn from the labyrinths and breathing mountains. How do you look and where are you looking? Note when you're stuck, put sugar on your tradition pills, and record before breaking. How's that feel to rot with glee, to decay me?
Fuck on the sides as I keep some perspective. No double standards are done in the time. Fuck on the sides as I keep some perspective. No double standards are done in the time. But we don't make war. No double standards are done in the time. I know you keep it, your cat was done. It's left me for but no matter how I can't keep us from our demons, no double standards are done in the time. Fuck on the sides as I keep some perspective. No double standards are done in the time.